1860. The Democratic Party is about to split down the seams, not once, but twice. The newly minted Republicans will bring forward a dark horse candidate, frontier politician, Abraham Lincoln. Before the year is over, states will begin seceding, and the United States of America will soon be plunged into a fight for its very life. A fight against itself. The nation is poised on the edge of catastrophe, and in their little Battle Creek home, Adventist leaders John and Mary Loughborough are facing a crisis of their own. Their tiny daughter, Teresa, is fighting a losing battle for her life. While others celebrate the new year, the Loughborough home is filled with sadness.
Died in Battle Creek, Michigan, January 2nd, 1860, Teresa C., only child of brother and sister Loughborough, 1 year, 10 months, and 23 days of age. Her disease was lung fever, which terminated in consumption. The lonely parents deeply feel their loss, but the blessed hope of the coming of Jesus and the resurrection, which they have so long cherished, now sustains them.
John Loughborough is a close friend of James and Ellen White.
His original name was Loughborough rather than Loughborough, Irish. He converts and becomes a Sabbath-keeping Adventist in 1852. And from that point on, he throws himself into preaching for the Sabbatarian Adventist movement.
Now at 28, John and his wife Mary are living in Battle Creek. With the death of their daughter, the Adventist community gathers with the family to mourn.
Early this morning, we were called to go up to Brother Loughborough's. The little one was dying. Oh, how sad the sight! A mother witnessing the last agonies of her loved one, her only child. We witness the dying struggle. The little eyes are closed, no more to look on earthly things. The little prattling tongue has ceased. Her troubles are ended. Quietly will she rest until the life-giver calls her from her dusty bed. This is a dark, dreary world. Ellen White.
On the heels of Teresa's death, Mary Loughborough is heartbroken. John Loughborough hides his sorrow in activity, scheduling a preaching tour of eastern Michigan and taking Mary with him.
Well, that made the Adventist Church. Never in the history of the world did people travel as much as they did. They were constantly on the move. Americans as a whole were beginning to do that, but they were more so. James White loved the railroads. If you look at the Review and Herald for much of the 19th century, you'll see railroad schedules because they just were traveling constantly.
The Loughboroughs are not the only ones traveling. Another Sabbatarian Adventist, John Nevins Andrews, a close friend of the Loughboroughs, is slowly making his way from Michigan to New York State.
My object in going east is the preparation of a Sabbath history, but I will, however, do all I can in holding meetings. John Nevins Andrews.
Andrews is a successful preacher and also one of the Adventists' best scholars. His book on the Sabbath ultimately becomes the first large scholarly work by Adventists on this topic. He also impacts the early Adventist community by studying other important issues, such as a system for tithes and offerings that they call systematic benevolence.
There's this group of ministers who are working, but they don't have any regular salaries. And it's J.N. Andrews who decides he's going to study. He comes to the conclusion that the Bible teaches very clearly, Paul teaches that there should be order in how money is raised. And that leads to a very important step in organization of the church, and that is systematic benevolence.
As Andrews travels to New York, Another man from the West is traveling in the same direction. Abraham Lincoln arrives in New York City to speak at Cooper Union.
Let us have faith that right makes might. And in that faith, let us to the end dare to do our duty as we understand it.
With these words, Abraham Lincoln concludes his address at the first stop in a tour that introduces him in the East. In New York, famous photographer Matthew Brady takes a portrait of Lincoln. Later, Lincoln will reportedly say,
Brady and the Cooper Union speech made me president.
While Lincoln is traveling in the East, back in Battle Creek, a tempest is brewing in the pages of the Review and Herald. James White unintentionally begins a long argument by writing two back-to-back pieces entitled Bills, Bills and Borrowed Money.
James White was a highly driven individual. When he accepted the Millerite message, he went off in the middle of winter and he preached down the coast of Maine, pushing himself way beyond where he should as a young man, and yet hundreds of people responded. So he was highly driven and very energetic, very focused. He had good organizational skills, perfectly oriented as a person or situated as a person to be a leader of a movement. And so when he finally steps into the publishing role and thinks in terms of organizing the movement, that works very well for the movement.
White's two articles raise the question of incorporating church property, in this case the Review and Herald, so that it can be legally held and insured. He refuses to be personally responsible for money loaned to the publishing work. In response, John Loughborough writes a letter published under the heading Legal Organization, in which he supports White's call.
No reasonable man could blame Brother White for not wishing to be responsible for the debts of the Review Office. I seriously doubt whether any of you brethren would wish to assume a debt of $1,500 without anything to secure you. Now, what I understand is necessary to remedy this matter is to organize in such a manner that we can hold church property legally. Then the property could be held in the name of the church, insured in the name of the church, money borrowed in the name of the church, and no individual would have to take a burden upon him which he ought not to bear.
Not everyone agrees with White and Loughborough, and opposition is also presented in the pages of the Review and Herald. In fact, one of the corresponding editors, R.F. Cottrell, writes,
I think it would be wrong to make us a name, since that lies at the foundation of Babylon. The work in which we are engaged is the Lord's, and He needs not the aid of insurance companies to take care of His property. Those that lend money to the office lend it to the Lord, and they must trust the Lord for it. If He sees fit to let them lose it here, if they are faithful, He will repay them hereafter. He will not fail.
This whole process of organizing the church is actually swimming upstream against a current established during the Millerite movement by George Storrs. George Storrs is the one we remember who's saying, as soon as a church is organized and develops a creed, at that moment it becomes Babylon.
Babylon is confusion. Babylon is an organized system against biblical truth, against the teaching of the Second Advent.
And that is a long shadow that is cast well beyond 1844 over the Adventist movement as well.
The discussion drags on for months. In September, the Review and Herald publishes a call for a conference in Battle Creek to discuss the controversial question of organization.
The principal object of this general gathering is to call together as many brethren as possible to consider several important questions, such as the proper method of holding church property, the wants of our office of publication, etc. We request churches in other states to send delegates, as important business will be considered.
Just 10 days before this conference, Ellen White gives birth to a son, John Herbert. And on Friday, September 28, delegates from 5 states arrive in Battle Creek. After spending the Sabbath together, the meetings begin in earnest. Despite disagreements and lengthy discussions, 3 major decisions are made.
Resolved, that this conference recommend to our individual churches so to organize as to hold their church property or church buildings legally.
The second resolution is to adopt a constitution for the legal incorporation of the Publishing Association.
This association shall be denominated the Advent Review Publishing Association, the object of which shall be the publication of periodicals, books, and tracts, calculated to convey instruction on Bible truth, especially the fulfillment of prophecy, the commandments of God, and the faith of Jesus. Unanimously carried.
The third and most contentious discussion is choosing a legal unified name for organization and order among the churches.
The name Seventh-day Adventists was proposed as a simple name and one expressive of our faith and position. Moved by Brother Hull that we recommend the name we have chosen to the churches generally.
As the Sabbatarian Adventists discuss organization throughout the spring, summer, and fall of 1860, culminating in the naming of the church and the election of officers for the new Advent Review Publishing Association, the rest of the nation is also engrossed with an election, one of the most divided in American history.
1860 is going to be a feisty year. You're going to see Lincoln win the election because the Democratic Party is going to split over the slavery issue, and denominations will as well. The slavery issue is that divisive in American society, whether it's politics or whether it's religion. It is splitting churches, it is splitting the political parties.
A 3-way split meant the Republicans were going to win no matter what Lincoln did, by simply keeping his mouth shut, not saying a thing, letting his handlers do all the work. And the Republicans would win, and then trying to hold the country back, which was already shattering underneath his feet.
For the Adventists, the year ends the way it began, with the death of a child. In October, James White travels to Wisconsin to preach and confront what the Adventists call fanaticism that has entered certain churches.
He wrote back, he said, I have a feeling that all is not well at home. And she wrote back, hey, everything's fine, that little babe is eating a lot and everything is okay. But she no more mailed a letter, and the little boy became ill.
John Herbert White, less than 3 months old, becomes deathly ill. James, summoned by Ellen White with a telegram, rushes home to Battle Creek.
My dear babe was a great sufferer. 24 days and nights we anxiously watched over him, using all the remedies we could for his recovery, and earnestly presenting his case to the Lord. December 14, I was called up. My babe was worse. I listened to his labored breathing and felt his pulseless wrist. I knew that he must die. That was an hour of anguish for me. The icy hand of death was already upon him. We watched his feeble, gasping breath until it ceased, and we felt thankful that his sufferings were ended. My heart ached as though it would break, yet I could not shed a tear. We were disappointed in not having Brother Loughborough to conduct the funeral services, and my husband spoke upon the occasion to a crowded house. We followed our child to Oak Hill Cemetery, there to rest until the life-giver shall come and break the fetters of the tomb and call him forth immortal. After we returned from the funeral, my home seemed lonely. I felt reconciled to the will of God, yet despondency and gloom settled upon me. Ellen White.
As the Adventists mourn yet another loss, they can hardly imagine the amount of death that will soon be visited upon the entire country. On December 20, only 6 days after John Herbert White's death, South Carolina is the first state to secede from the Union.